Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
The sky was dark, threatening rain, as Ryan got out of the car, slamming the door behind him. Uncle Selwyn's house, well, less house and more the ancestral family manor he'd inherited and called home, stood in front of him, larger and more foreboding than he remembered as a child. He had been banging on the front door and yelling for his uncle to come out for the better part of 10 minutes as the other cars pulled up. Jiry, the youngest cousin, barely in college, in his hand-me-down Toyota Tercel, Jennifer in her BMW Z3, a gift to herself for finishing law school and getting an associate position, saving every penny she could since high school to afford it, and Ellie in the seat next to her, having lost her license while arguing with an undercover cop trying to drive back drunk from a sorority party. They had all grown up together, even though Jiry, Ryan, Jennifer, Ellie, and Chris were only cousins. They were closer than most brothers and sisters. Ryan would have considered himself the leader, but Ellie and Jiry probably wouldn't have thought of him that way, since he usually tormented the two of them to no end as kids. Jiry still had a scar on his arm from years ago, when Ryan pushed him down a hill and he landed on an old can that someone had thrown away and was hidden in the grass. And Ellie never forgave him for locking her in the closet at her grandmother's funeral when she was 3. It was her earliest memory and not one of her favorites. Of the parents, all related by blood on their grandfather's side of the family, they were all the only children of each one. Only Uncle Selwyn never had kids, and for a very long time, the eccentric, wild-haired man who could never hold a job longer than a few months was one of their favorite people in the whole world. A consummate storyteller, Selwyn was equal parts entertaining, hilarious, and frightening as hell. But he doted on each one of them, even when they got older and outgrew his stories, except Jiry, who thought Selwyn could do no wrong. But then their grandfather died, while their grandmother died somewhat peaceably from medical complications when they were all still very young, and gave Ellie that horrible memory. Their grandfather had been with them until Ryan entered middle school. His death was much less peaceable. The mailman, dropping off mail on the front porch, had been the one to hear the sounds coming from the woods behind the house. A machine sound, ragged, clogged with something. He went around the back and saw the shape in the trees, a chipper of some kind, and all the blood everywhere. Uncle Selwyn was different after that. At the funeral, he spoke to no one, sitting toward the back, his wild hair finally showing flecks of gray. He'd been left the old manor house in the will, but he showed no signs of enjoyment or grateful for the honor. Instead, he just grew more uncomfortable, and he mostly retreated from family life. 6 months later, Ryan's father died. He'd been coming home from work when he got a flat tire. At that point, the story became jumbled, as there were no witnesses. Police assumed he'd been hit by a truck and dragged the better part of a mile, but no one ever reported a truck in the area. But there was no mistaking the flat tire, the bloody streak that lay along the roadway, and his mangled, ruined body. It was tragic on many fronts, but the worst was the news that, after months of being underwater, his father had gotten a promotion and couldn't wait to tell his family the good news when he got home. Jennifer's mother had been given a long spa weekend by her firm for a good job well done. She was found in one of the tanning beds. The spa was fined for improper equipment maintenance, but they said that there was no way that the machine glass could break like that, or that broken glass could rip a person apart like that. but there was no other evidence that anything happened. The camera in there wasn't working properly that day, and there was no reason to suspect anyone would or could do that to another person in that short a period of time. All of their parents on their grandfather's side, one by one, all died in freak accidents. They were all different, but the results were the same. Shredded, mangled, horrifically so. All but Uncle Selwyn. He came to Ryan's father's funeral, but then he was never seen. He never called. He never even sent sympathy cards. He simply retreated into that house and didn't come out. The rumors started shortly after. Everyone may have died in an accident, but they all just knew that Uncle Selwyn was involved. He had to be. Why had everything bad happened to his family, and he was left alone? Gary's father was last. His car was upside down at the bottom of a hill, and even though the inside of the car was relatively undamaged, he was torn to shreds. For a few years, that was the end of it, but then, a few days ago, Chris, who worked at the docks unloading cargo from freighters, got word that he was going to be a father for the first time. He left voicemails for all his cousins, except for Ryan, whose voicemail never worked right. It always seemed to come days after they were supposed to. The last voicemail he ever sent was to Jennifer, the final number of the 5 he called, and on it, Jennifer heard the commotion at the dock as the cable came loose, and the horrible sound as the shipping crates came together, crushing Chris between them. The funeral was short, in a closed casket on the recommendation of the funeral home director. Again, no Uncle Selwyn, though no one was surprised anymore. During the funeral, though, Ryan received a call. He was handling most of the funeral planning, so no one thought much about it until he took the call out to the parking lot, and they heard his muffled yelling. He got into his car and drove off. Everyone wondered what had happened when Jennifer received a call herself. It was the insurance company, apologizing for calling, but since Ryan had hung up on them, they felt it necessary to call another family member. Based on their investigation, it would be necessary to file potential criminal charges against Chris's employer. The cable had not broken, as originally thought, but appeared to have been cut cleanly by something powerful and very sharp. They knew it wasn't the docks Ryan was driving to. They all got into their cars and followed after them. Ryan was practically ready to bust the door down when Gary pulled him back. "Ryan, we don't know if..." "Like hell we don't." Ryan grabbed Gary by the shirt and pushed him back off the porch. He may not have cut that cable, but he sure as hell knows something's going on. And for a long time. I'm not leaving until I get some goddamn answers. Just then, the lock turned, and Selwyn, looking like he'd seen better days, opened it. His eyes were surrounded by dark rings, almost sunken, and he looked older and more tired than his 50-odd years suggested. His hair, though, was still just as wild as ever, sticking up all over the place like he'd woken up with his finger in an electric socket. Ryan moved to grab him, but Jennifer put a hand on Ryan's shoulder. "Give him a minute, Ryan. Let him explain himself first." Selwyn ushered them all into the sitting room. The room looked more like an old film set than a room, the couch in the middle covered with an old blanket, and the many staring eyes of taxidermied birds, foxes, and other animals crammed into every corner. After Grandma died, taxidermy became Grandpa's big hobby, and he'd gotten very good at it. While they tried to find places to sit in the room, Selwyn leaned against the fireplace. There was a small fire going on in it, and even as everyone waited for him to speak, he seemed lost in it, staring into its center. "It's true. I do know something about what's going on, but I haven't done what you think I have. It's because I can't do anything that I am the way I am. You all deserve to know the truth." He sighed. "Our family's cursed." Ryan rolled his eyes, got off his chair, and punched Selwyn across the jaw. The others pulled him back, but Selwyn stood up, holding his jaw, which was bruising quite badly already, and he just kept his same sullen expression. "Lying son of a bitch! What did you do? What did you do to everyone?" "Ryan, stop it." Jennifer whipped Ryan around. She lowered her voice. "I don't believe it either, but hitting him won't get us the truth. Let him talk, and pay attention, and see if you can figure out what really happened." Gary, on the other hand, was the only one to check and see if his uncle was okay. Selwyn nodded and waved him away. "I don't blame you, Ryan. I would have done the same thing as you, if I heard the same thing. But it's true. I wish it wasn't." Ryan, despite clear signs that was against his wishes, sat down, frowning, and let Selwyn talk. "You hear things growing up, things that sound strange, that the adults only talk about when they think the kids aren't paying attention. But I always did. This, with everyone dying like this, it's not new. No one talks about it, but every generation on this side of the family is being wiped out. Not one in 150 years has died of natural causes." Selwyn looked down into the fire. "It all has to do with this house, and my great-grandfather, your great-great-grandfather, and my namesake, Selwyn Meyer. I don't know how much you kids know about your family's history, but he was a legend in real estate. Made a fortune, but sadly for us, it wasn't always honestly earned. After all his hard work, he wanted to have a place away from the rush of the world, and he found this land here was exactly what he wanted. It was already owned by a family that had settled there shortly after the Revolutionary War. He offered to buy the land, offering less than what it was worth, but the owners refused, said they had an obligation to be there, and their family went back decades and further." Selwyn tapped on top of the fireplace. Apparently, he wasn't one to settle for a no. He offered them more, eventually twice, then 3 times what the land was worth, but they still wouldn't budge. They said they literally could not leave. The land meant too much to them. Great-grandfather Selwyn assumed the land must have had something far more valuable than they were letting on, so he hired a band of thugs to help him search the land at night, looking for what secrets the family was hiding and to rough the family up if they turned up nothing. He found a cave, expected gold. Instead, he found an altar with a large chunk of brownish crystal on it. Ellie scrunched her brow. "What crystal is brown?" Selwyn smiled. "That's just it. They didn't know. But Great-Granddad said he picked it up, and it spoke to him." Ryan sighed. "Spoke to him? Where did you hear all this? He talked to you after hanging out with Captain Morgan all night?" Ellie spun on Ryan, scowling. "Ryan, Jesus." Selwyn waved at her gently. "It's okay. I know it sounds crazy, but I know because it's all in his journal. This journal nobody knew existed until now." He threw a dusty book onto the couch where it flopped open. The paper inside was thicker than the type they saw in books today, more leathery, but the ink in it was very legible, even if the handwriting was difficult to make out. "You don't believe in curses, Ryan, but your great-great-granddad did. It's because the rock that spoke to him asked to be freed from its prison, and it would help him. So he smashed the crystal on the ground. The next day, the family and the land all perished in a horse-drawn cart accident while going to town, and he bought the land just like he wanted. Selwyn suddenly pounded his fist hard on the fireplace top. He winced and looked at his hand. A small trickle of blood leaked out of it. But something happened in the deal. Either he cheated it, or it cheated him, but it doesn't really matter which is true. That's when the curse rebounded on our family. This thing from the crystal comes for our family, intending to wipe it out a generation at a time. Maybe that's the reason, deep down, I never had kids. But the thing is, even when they're not yours, some kids just worm their way into your heart. He went over to where he threw the book onto the couch and flipped through the pages, coming to a page with a drawing of what had to be the crystal he mentioned. It looked a lot smaller, cracked in places. There was one fragment of the crystal left. That thing can't stand it, and whoever has it is left alone by the creature. Maybe it's afraid it'll trap it once again. I don't know. But I know it works, because I'm the last one of my generation, and my father gave it to me. Jiry took the book and began flipping through it. Ryan said nothing, but balled his fists again. The day after he gave it to me, that was when the mailman found him, lodged halfway in his wood chipper. It must have been waiting, just waiting, for him to give it up. Ryan had enough and stood up. You expect us to buy this crap? And there you turn around and tell us that Grandpa, loved you more than my dad and gave you that? Ellie teared up. If that's true, why didn't you try and protect Mom? Selwyn gulped and teared up. I did try to save them. But you don't believe me now, even after all this has happened. What do you think they thought of me when I tried to warn them? When I didn't even know the truth until I read that journal? The room quieted. That made sense. Who would believe something so insane from lonely old storytelling Uncle Selwyn? But tonight is not a good night. Since you're all here, I was going to tell you I had the crystal and give it to one of you. But I can't choose. You'd have to do it yourself. And Selwyn broke down into tears. The crystal's gone. It wasn't on my bedside table when I woke up this morning. And now you're all here, and that's the worst thing that could happen. Jiry, who'd been looking closely at a page in the journal, where there was a rough, almost childish sketch of a lanky figure with long talons and a fiendish face. Why is that, Uncle? Because if it comes tonight for me, none of you are safe either. It could take you all in one night. Even Ryan looked around for a second, half expecting a giant monstrosity to come into the room just then, but nothing did. It was Jennifer that finally made the first move, standing up. Well, thank you for talking to us, Uncle Selwyn. We appreciate it. I think it might be best if we get going. But it's not I think we'll be just fine. She then waved to the rest to follow her out of the room and into the front hall. Ryan glared at her. What are you doing? Jennifer sighed. Look at him, Ryan. Do you really think he would cut a steel cable? He's not a murderer, but he's not well. He needs professional help. He thinks a curse is killing people, and he feels responsible. You heard him talking about that crystal. I don't know all about Grandpa hating him, but wow, wouldn't that mess you up if you got into a big fight with your dad, and the next day he died, and as horribly as that? Everyone shuffled nervously for a moment. It sounded right. Jennifer was always the voice of reason. That's why she'd become such a successful lawyer, after all. Look, we can maybe sit with him for a little while, make sure he doesn't hurt himself, while we wait for someone to come and get him. Does that work for everyone? Everyone nodded except for Jiry, who still held the journal. Look, I want to make sure he's okay too, but Are we so sure he's wrong? I mean, look at this drawing. It's just... None of this is normal. Other people's families just don't have this happen to them. Jennifer sighed. Gary, come on. What's more likely? That we have a freakishly high number of accidents in our family? Or that some monster is killing them because it got stiffed by our great-great-grandfather? I know he was your favorite, but it's crazy talk. He needs a doctor and proper care. Go back in there. I'm going to make a phone call to some doctors I know, and I don't want him to hear me. They went back inside. Ryan took a few deep breaths to get himself under control, then led Gary and Ellie into the sitting room. Uncle Selwyn wasn't in there. There was another exit from the sitting room that led to a side hallway, but he wasn't down there either, and no one saw him leave. Ellie wandered into the side hall, calling for him and checking in rooms. Ryan pounded his hands on the couch, dust flying up. Where did he run off to now? Gary sat down on the couch, his worry overridden by the journal he held in his hands. He flipped through it, studying the pages. What if it is real? Jesus, Gary. How do you know he didn't make that himself? He could have spent months making something just to fake you out. He's nuts, Gary. Accept it. There were footsteps, and Ellie came running back. Hey, guys. There's a really weird room back here. You should come and see it. Gary stood up. I'll get Jennifer. Ryan shook his head. Her muffled voice could still be heard in the front hall, talking to someone. She's busy. We'll go look and tell her later. The three cousins went down the side hall together to what may have been a first-floor bedroom sometime in the past, but had been converted to an office. Newspaper clippings were tacked to the walls, and notebooks filled the two-fold-out table that had been placed in there. The clippings ranged from the obituaries of their parents to much older, dating back decades. Written on each obituary in pen was some method of death, all of which involved mutilation of some sort. Ellie flipped open one of the notebooks. It's all family, going back generations. He must have been studying all the deaths. She pointed at her mother's obituary. He might be crazy, Ryan, but if he is, our family is really, really unlucky. There was a loud crash. In this room, the sound was washed out and could have come from practically anywhere, but in general it appeared to have at least started upstairs. They ran back into the sitting room. Outside, they could still hear muffled conversation. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Jeez, didn't you hear that? He pushed the door open. Jennifer was still in the front hall, but not quite how they left her. She lay on the floor near the main staircase, surrounded by bits of railing from where it appeared she had fallen. But more than that, she looked like she had been attacked with a series of very sharp knives. She was barely recognizable, as her face and arms had nearly been flayed away. The muffled conversation that they'd heard through the door was her phone on speakerphone. It seemed to be some kind of spoken word relaxation exercise she had saved to her phone, repeating all is well over and over again. No one moved. Ellie started to sob a little, and Gary kept swallowing, either to prevent himself from throwing up or preparing himself to. Ryan looked on in absolute horror. Just a moment ago, she'd just been fine. They hadn't been gone that long, but somehow she'd gone upstairs and fallen, or was pushed. But the gashes and slicing, that was no accident. Does anyone believe me now that he's crazy? Gary shook his head. No way, Ryan. You saw him. He doesn't have the strength to. To do what? Stab someone who doesn't see it coming? Push somebody over a staircase? Look, he'd do anything to make us believe this stuff. He reached down to grab her phone, but something crunched as he did so, and the phone shut off. Shit. Gary, you got your phone? Crap. I think I left it at the funeral home. Ellie? Mine's in the car, but I rode up with Jennifer, and I'm not digging in her jacket for her. She started to sob. Yeah, that's fine. Gary, mine's in my car, too. He handed Gary his keys. Here, go get it. We need to call somebody. Gary ran out to the car, and Ellie and Ryan went into the sitting room. Ryan grabbed a blanket off of the couch and took it into the front hall, covering Jennifer with it. He heard a thump from upstairs. Quietly, he started up the stairs, looking to see the cause of the noise. But the house was so big it could have been one of several rooms that it came from. He stepped back down, moved quietly to the sitting room, keeping his eyes on the stairs the whole time. He waved to Ellie. Ellie, I think he's upstairs. Go on, get to my car. Tell Gary to start it up. I'll be out in a minute. Ellie nodded, moved past the covered body of Jennifer, and went out to the porch. Ryan heard another thump from upstairs, but turned his attention briefly to Ellie to make sure she was going. His eyes widened. The fog had rolled in, covering the lawn to the point where the cars could not be seen. Except now, Ryan saw a car, his car, tumbling forward, the emergency brake and headlights off, gathering speed. Ellie had no chance. The car smashed into her, crushing part of the porch staircase as well. Ryan screamed and ran out to what remained of the porch. All he could see of Ellie was her hand sticking up under the fender. It wasn't moving. He tried to feel her pulse calling to her. Nothing. He sat up on the porch looking at the car itself. The door was open on the driver's side. He got up to look. The car stank from all the food wrappers he left in there, and the pile of mail from the past few days that he hadn't bothered to look at was still scattered on the passenger seat. But there was no sign of Gary or his phone. A thought suddenly burned in Ryan's brain. He couldn't believe it, but then he couldn't believe a whole lot else that was going on. Could Gary be helping Uncle Selwyn? Gary was always his favorite, no doubt about that, but maybe he'd gotten caught up in all of this too. He couldn't know for sure, but Ellie was gone, Jennifer was gone, and everyone else was missing. He couldn't take any chances. There was nothing in the car he could use as a weapon, but walking around the house he managed to come across a woodpile, and next to it an old axe. After the chipper accident, it made sense that Selwyn might want to go back to more manual labor. Ryan took it and went through the back door, holding the axe ready. The house was so quiet, other than the occasional thump from upstairs. Ryan checked behind everything, just to make sure he wasn't taken by surprise as he made his way back up toward the main staircase. Once he made it to the second floor, Ryan heard another thump and tried to follow it. It seemed to be coming from the second bedroom on the left, the door one of the few that was closed. He slowly and quietly turned the knob. This was Uncle Selwyn's bedroom. It was obvious from how lived-in it was. And there, staring out the window, was Uncle Selwyn, banging his head on the glass, making the thump. He seemed to be in pain, but there was no obvious wound, other than the mark on his hand from earlier. Uncle Selwyn! He raised the axe, ready to swing it if he needed to. You need to come with me. I'm going to take you somewhere where you can get the help you need. Selwyn stopped banging his head. I'm not the one who needs help, Ryan. It's too late for that. He turned to face Ryan. You didn't find the shard, did you? Ryan would have rolled his eyes, but too much had happened in the past 10 minutes for him to feel anything but anger and hatred. There is no shard, you miserable, crazy old bastard. You need help. You need to come with me now. At that, Selwyn smiled. So, you still don't believe it, even now. I guess that's good in a way. Selwyn stepped toward him. As he did so, he seemed to grow taller, thinner. His skin began to melt away. His lips peeled back, revealing long, sharp teeth. Ryan dropped the axe. Sometimes it's good to drop the pretense. I love to feed on hope and happiness before I get to the meat, and when non-believers see me, why, that's when hope is at its strongest. Talons emerged from under the dripping fingernails. Ryan burst into tears and fell on his knees, and then with an ear-rending scream it came at him. Some distance away from the house, Jiry woke in the mud, scratched and bleeding, his head aching but otherwise unharmed. Before waking here, he last remembered being in the car and something pulling him violently out to the side just as he grabbed Ryan's phone. His car was a mess, and Jiry had to dig through a pile of mail to find it. In his other hand was one of the envelopes. The envelope had no return address, but Jiry recognized the handwriting. It was Uncle Selwyn's. Ryan's phone buzzed. There was a voicemail notification. Jiry checked it. It was dated about a week ago. His phone always had that problem, with voicemails coming days after. Jiry recognized the number on it. Thankfully, Ryan never locked his phone, so he listened. "Hi, Ryan. It's Uncle Selwyn. I know you and I have never gotten along much, but I hope you keep what I sent you the other day. It's important. My dad gave me that the day before he died, and he didn't do it out of love. I never told you this, but your granddad hated me, Ryan. He thought I was lazy, selfish, and had no purpose in life. But we had a fight that day, and he told me that with this, I would know what it was like to watch everything and everyone you loved die. He was right. I held on to this crystal and saw as your parents, my brothers and sisters, all died, and I could do nothing. Or, really, I didn't do anything. I was a coward. But I know you're not. You're decisive, Ryan. And that's why I gave this to you. You're strong, and you'll know what to do when time is right. Maybe you'll be better at protecting your cousins than I am." There was a sound like a door opening. "It's here. I love you guys, and goodbye." There were still a few more seconds left on the call. Just before the voicemail ended, Jiry heard the sound of an ear-rending scream.
Joseph Murek rocked back on his heels, pulling a sleeve of his thick cotton shirt over his nose. He stared at the ground, not making a sound. "Oiling the gears," as his grandpa said. No amount of thought could bring him any resolution, however, 4 days in a row. By God, did it smell. The ground around Joseph's muddy boots was littered with corpses of birds. His dog, Hera, whined restlessly behind him, keeping her distance from the bird carcasses. This fact in itself alarmed him more than the event. Hera was fond of eating just about anything. Normally, a field full of easily accessible birds would have looked much akin to a free buffet. He sank to a knee, casting his eyes among the fallen animals. It was getting worse, whatever it was. It started 4 days ago when his wife Beth came sprinting toward the house at full speed. Rounding 60 years of age, this was a sight to behold. Her blue sundress billowed behind her, sending her rocking off balance as she ran. Long curly strands of graying black hair bounced along behind her as she kicked off her loose sandals, picking up speed. Joseph smiled. What a racket. She had been shrieking his name the whole way, skipping over twigs, tree roots, and other obstacles that separated her from their small, upstate New York cottage. Her shrill cries drew Joseph out of his armchair. As he neared the worn screen door, Beth rocketed by him, almost knocking him off balance and barely making it through the closing door. "The ducks!" she screamed from inside the house. Joseph stepped outside, lingering on the threshold. Beth's face was white, even whiter than usual. Her chest heaved and her hair framing her face was matted with sweat. Joseph knitted his brow in confusion and turned toward their small boathouse.
"They're everywhere! Filthy damn things!"
she continued, wailing from the security of their kitchen. For someone so accustomed to the flora and fauna of their environment, she still turned into a terrified schoolgirl when faced with bugs. Joseph laughed then. It hadn't been funny in the end. The boathouse path Joseph dug out in his younger days began to show signs of disrepair, and to tell the truth, he simply didn't have the energy to maintain it anymore. He walked down the bumpy, root-snarled road, taking in a deep breath of moist air. Rain tonight, probably. He kept his pace slow but steady. At his doctor's behest, he was to take it easy. Very easy. After his second heart attack, he was a ticking time bomb. It was then that he noticed the quiet. No more than 10 steps ago, the low thrum of crickets and cicadas could be heard chattering through the woods. Now, nothing. He paused. He could see the lumpy silhouette of the partially repaired boathouse over the scrub brush. It was on the wrong side of a rotten tree last fall, and the insurance company was taking their sweet time. Besides the eerie quiet, everything seemed normal. He turned toward his destination and planted his right foot. The crunch that issued from underneath his boot traveled all the way up his body. He yanked his foot back, staggering to catch his balance. "Oh, Christ," he said. The ground was littered with insects, almost to the point of choking the path, and it only became worse as the trail neared the boathouse. Dread settled over him like a thick woolen coat. His bones ached, and he knew for damn sure he wasn't going any further. He turned on his heel and began walking back to the house, his pulse rising to alarming levels. There were thousands of them, all dead. He decided that a quicker pace in the return trip was worth the risk. He swung open the screen door to the house and pushed past Hera. Beth was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping a glass of what most assuredly was not water. She looked up as he entered. He could tell she was still on the verge of tears.
"Did you see them?"
she said. Her left leg jogged up and down nervously. "I saw them." Joseph crossed the yellowed linoleum of the kitchen floor, tugging off the cap Beth knitted for him years ago. His hair had all chosen to abandon ship before going gray. Maybe some kind of chemical got loose from a farm nearby, but I'm not positive. The sheer number of them was... He stuffed the cap into the pocket of a hanging coat near the door.
"Fucked up?"
Beth said. That sounds about right. Joseph nodded. It was fucked up, all right. I'm going to give Animal Control a call in the morning. Let's keep Hera in for the night. She'll stick with one of us until we figure this out. Beth nodded warily as she watched Joseph lock the front door for the first time in years. Neither slept well that evening. Now this. Shaken from his daydreaming by the pungent aroma, Joseph marveled once more at the sheer amount of death. The fallen birds ranged widely in everything from size to species. Joseph was no ornithologist, or even a bird watcher for that matter, but he knew damn well that entire clouds of birds didn't just drop from the sky. Hera whined at him again. He reached down and stroked the big dog behind her ears. "You're telling me." He felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up, suddenly feeling that they were no longer alone. "Let's get out of here, girl." He retreated from what felt like a crime scene, just as he did the past 3 days, his heart racing uncomfortably in his chest. The woods around their home grew still and quiet as the days slipped by. Beth often refused to come out of the house. After her encounter with the legions of dead insects, she found better ways to spend her time. Indoors. Weeds were already sprouting up in her once pristine garden, and Joseph brushed right by them on his way back to the house. Hera nosed her way in front of him, eager to get inside. "What is it now?" Beth called from across the house. She was engrossed in her knitting. That was good. "Honestly?" Joseph said. "Honestly." Birds. Joseph made his way through the small kitchen into the living room, approaching the phone. A whole hell of a lot of dead birds. The clicking of metal needles stopped. "Here we go."
"You said you would call that man back if..."
Her voice began to rise as she spoke.
Calm down, calm down!"
Joseph raised both of his hands, backing to the room slowly. "I'm calling him right now." He picked up the receiver and dug a scrap of paper out of his pocket. On it was scribbled the name and number of the local sheriff, not one of his favorite people. Nonetheless, the man offered up his personal contact information during their last meeting, just in case anything else strange happened. Beth calmed visibly and slumped back in her chair. The rhythmic click of knitting needles resumed. Joseph punched the number into the phone, and after 2 beats, a voice answered on the other side of the line. "Officer Coolin, it's Joseph." No response. "Murick, Joseph Murick, the guy with all the dead bugs." Joseph closed his eyes and massaged his forehead with his thumb and index finger. "Mr. Murick, I'm sorry. Always been bad with names. Won't forget tramping around ankle deep in bugs anytime soon, though. Is everything all right?" the younger man asked. "It's getting worse," Joseph said. "Went for a look today and the entire area has a fresh layer of dead birds." "Birds?" Coughlin's voice took on a tinge of worry. "How many are we talking?" "I don't know." Joseph lowered his voice, glancing at Beth. "Hundreds." "Shit," Coughlin said. "I'm on my way. I'll bring some of the animal boys to help clean up." "Thanks." Joseph hung up the receiver. He needed a drink. 2 hours later, Joseph stood in the woods once more, this time accompanied by 3 other men. The sheriff wore his standard officer's uniform and stood about a head shorter than Joseph. Dark sunglasses covered his eyes and sweat ran down his face from the hairline of his black buzz cut. The other 2 looked like a series of mugshots come to life. Big, tough, and ugly were a few descriptors that immediately came to mind. They wore grungy jeans. The larger of the 2 sported a black sleeveless shirt picturing a grinning skull. Charming. The 3 men carried an array of equipment ranging from shovels to strange elongated pieces of aluminum topped with metal hooks. Joseph was less than keen to discover just how they would be using those long silver rods. "You weren't kidding." Officer Coughlin pinched his nose. "Jesus, the smell!" The 2 larger fellows didn't seem to mind the stench. "Get to work, boys. Joseph and I need to talk." He motioned to Joseph to step away. Joseph followed the sheriff upwind, hoping for a respite from the smell. "Anything this time?" Coughlin said. Joseph shook his head. "No, nothing that either of us noticed. It was the same way with the bugs and the..." Joseph scrunched his nose. His eyes watered a bit. "Fish?" Coughlin finished for him. "That was something special." He moved around Joseph, removing a small camera from the pocket of his pants. The small silver rectangle shimmered when struck by the odd ray of sunlight piercing the normal gloom. "I'm going to take some photos again, and then I guess we'll get to work debirding your property." The small camera beeped and extended its lens. Joseph watched Coughlin move around the scene while taking a few careful photographs. He caught the 2 men from Animal Control and a few to offer perspective of the amount of dead birds in comparison to the large fellows. Oiling the gears. Joseph removed his hat and rubbed a rough hand over his scalp. "It's moving up, isn't it?" Joseph felt a chill. Coughlin stopped in his tracks, lowering the camera. "Up what?" Coughlin asked. "The food chain." Joseph's heart jumped up a few notches. First bugs, then fish, and now birds. All of them around my boathouse. "What the hell is going on here, Coughlin?" "Calm down, Joseph." Coughlin rested a hand on Joseph's shoulder, reaching up to compensate for height. His grip was firm, reassuring. "For now, let's get this cleaned up. The faster we get this done, the easier you'll sleep tonight." Coughlin squeezed the older man's shoulder, then headed for the truck. "It's some weird shit, that's for sure. Luckily for you, someone took an interest. Especially after I reported in today." He reached into the truck's bed, retrieved a long pole, and handed it to Joseph. "A crew from the city is coming to have a look at your boathouse and the surrounding area tomorrow afternoon, round 1. Joseph breathed a sigh of relief. Finally. He seized the metal rod from Coughlin and sneered. "Let's go bag some birds." Tools in hand, the men set about spending their final afternoon together. "Yep." Joseph speared a dead bird on the tip of his aluminum pole. "I knew I wasn't going to like what these did." He hefted the bird over to a growing pile near Coughlin's truck and shook it loose. It landed with a damp, stomach-churning smack and tumbled down the growing mound of carcasses. "Gonna take you all day if you keep bringing one in at a time," Graham Laurel, the larger of the Animal Control boys, muttered. He rested the tip of the pole he carried in the mound and slid 6 dead birds off of his hook with a bloody work boot. He was young, a bit of an asshole, and a full head taller than Joseph. He found something to moan about every few minutes once the conversations died down and the real work began. "Would you like to join me and my wife for dinner sometime, Graham?" Joseph said. "I just can't get enough of that winning personality." Graham spat on the ground and walked back through his cleared path through the slain fowl. He leaned the pole on his shoulder and raised his left hand, lazily wagging his middle finger through the air.
Mr. Laurel, how about a little respect for a taxpayer that makes sure you see a paycheck?"
Sheriff Coughlin said as he passed the goon. Graham spat again, dropped his middle finger, and stomped further into the woods. Coughlin approached the truck. He shrugged.
He's not a bad kid. Little bit of a temper and complains more than my grandmother, but not a bad kid."
Now, the other one, Dwayne. He's a piece of work. I'm sure, Joseph said. He'd already dismissed the exchange, his mind mulling over the situation at hand. In fact, he would still be thinking about what tomorrow would bring when Graham met the owl. Graham Laurel was pissed. He had forgotten to put sunscreen on his head. A bald patch had already begun to show among his tightly cut blonde hair and was now most certainly a bright angry red. He poked the top of his sweat-slicked scalp and cringed. Just fucking perfect.
"Hotter than shit,"
Graham said. He turned toward the old man's boathouse, combing the ground with his eyes.
"Damn dead birds everywhere."
He spotted a crow laying on the ground, undamaged beside the parade of ants crawling out of its eye sockets. He grimaced. Sick. He took a step back and hefted his aluminum pole. He jabbed the sharpened point into the bird and lifted it into the air. Ants rained down briefly as he swung the dead bird further away from him, and then he saw it. The owl. It occurred to him that he never saw an owl before. He never really cared about it. Until now. It sat up on a branch directly ahead of him, its pale face turned toward Graham. Large, yellow, unblinking eyes greeted his. What the hell is an owl doing out in the daylight? The owl ruffled its wings and turned its head. Graham had to stifle a shriek. The sudden move caught him off guard. The bird took a few careful steps to the left on the branch, almost like it was trying to see around Graham.
"Can I help you, man?"
Graham called up at the bird. Its lidless eyes returned to him. The white and brown plumage covered its body didn't seem to move at all.
"Hey!"
Graham waved his hands. The owl did not flinch. What the fuck? Graham dropped the aluminum pole with a metallic thump and scanned the ground for an object. Bingo! A large pine cone lay nearby, one side coated in dried mud. He hefted it in his right hand. He looked around, scanning for the old man and that damned sheriff. The coast was clear. The owl continued to stare. Graham could feel it looking into him.
"Cut it out, man!"
Graham, a natural-born pitcher with long, sinewy arms, squinted, aiming at the bird. His arm cocked back, then released like it was spring-loaded. The pine cone spun through the air, right on target.
"Oh shit, I really hummed that."
The pine cone bounced off of the small bird unfazed, but obviously injured. A chunk of feathers had been torn out of its chest by the projectile. Small dots of blood began to peek above the skin. Regardless, it continued to stare. Graham took a step backwards. What the? The owl moved again, its gaze returning to Graham's left. It wobbled on the branch, attempting to right itself drunkenly. The hell are you staring at? Graham shouted. But the lifeless form of the owl pitching to the ground stopped him. He froze in place. Something was wrong. He turned to his left slowly. His skin felt cold. He didn't see anything in the dwindling afternoon light. But something saw him. He felt a strange sensation and then burning hooks dug into his mind. He tried to scream, but realized that he was physically unable. His body was locked in place, along with his eyes, frozen in the direction he and his old friend the owl had been looking. As panic set in, he felt the burning barbs recede a little. Young and strong Graham. Graham. Graham tried to scream again. Nothing. What the fuck was that? The pain increased in his head. A bonfire smoldered behind his eyes. The agony slowly faded to a dull hum, but it never lost its unflinching hold. Still too strong, perhaps. Joseph's dog barked in the distance. The pain increased again, this time exponentially. Images flashed through his mind unbidden until he couldn't help but think of Lassie. He felt his lips curl into an uncomfortable grin. What is the name for this creature, Graham? Dog. It's a dog. Let me go, please. God, please don't kill me. I am sorry. Yes, sorry, Graham. I was not ready. You would have been spared pain. Graham shrieked inside his own mind with such force that the paralyzing barbs receded for a moment. Graham's mouth flopped open. Dog! Graham stated loudly. Sheriff Coughlin crunched through the foliage, snapping twigs with his heavy leather boots. The sun was going down and light was running low. Dwayne already stowed the gear and claimed a shotgun for the ride back. They decided to call it quits for the day, but no one had heard from or seen Graham for over an hour. He was sure he had went this way. Hera barked somewhere behind him. Dog! The voice of Graham boomed out from ahead. The sheriff, not liking the deadpan tone to the young man's voice, sprinted in Graham's direction. Who the hell was he talking to? That voice was Graham, all right, but wrong. He crashed through the undergrowth and came to a skidding stop at the prone form of Graham, twitching madly on the ground. White foam began to press between his tightly clenched teeth. His eyes rolled in their sockets like loose marbles. Coughlin dropped to his knees, unfastening his leather belt, pulling it out from around his waist with a snap. Don't choke on your tongue, you bastard. He pried the youth's mouth open and released his jaws once the belt was between them. After a few seconds, the seizing stopped. Graham was whiter than a sheet. His breath came in short, whispery gasps. Graham, what happened? He pulled the belt slowly out of Graham's mouth, letting it drop to the ground. Graham opened his mouth slowly. At first, only a wet, choking sound came out. The dog, it... He took a deep, shuddering breath. It wants the dog now. Blood began to run freely from his nostrils. He shook uncontrollably. Before long, the body Sheriff Coughlin held lay still. The small breaths faded. Graham! He shook the boy. Jesus, what happened? In front of him, something moved, yet the movement left no trace. His heart jumped into his throat. I couldn't even see it. What the fuck is going on? Leaves drifted to the ground where the disturbance occurred. The dog. The sheriff dropped the body of Graham Laurel and bolted to his feet. Joseph! Get away from the dog! He called out. Joseph massaged his left shoulder. It always started to ache toward the evening. The area looked considerably better than it had. Most of the visible birds were cleared away by the small crew. He did not envy whoever had to tie up the giant plastic sack of dead animals, however. Not even the Laurel boy. Hera barked behind him. He started, cursing out loud. The hell's wrong with you? Joseph turned toward the dog. You scared the shit out of me. Mind keeping a lid on the mutt? Dwayne Laurel growled from inside the truck. He had his dirty boots propped up on the dash while Coughlin wasn't around. Joseph decided against responding. His recent chats with Dwayne were unpleasant at best. Hera whined strangely and backed away from the truck, her tail tucked between her legs. Her tongue hung loosely out of her mouth. Her breath came in loud, jagged gasps. A growl ripped through the air. Joseph watched in horror as the dog that never so much as playfully nipped at someone turned into a frightened, murderous animal. Hera. What's wrong? Joseph backed away from the truck and the snarling dog. He turned quickly toward the woods. He could have sworn he heard someone call his name. Hera growled low in her throat. Strings of saliva hung from her jaws. She looked as though she was about to leap upon some unseen predator. When she froze in place, the horrible snarl etched itself onto her face. Her eyes blank and glassy. Her heaving abdomen was all but completely still, as far as he could tell. She wasn't breathing at all. "The hell's up with your dog, man?" Duane sat up, opening the door slightly. The sound of the wheezing sheriff crashed out of the woods. Hera regarded him indifferently. "Joseph!" Sheriff Coughlin inched his right hand toward the small leather strap holding a service pistol in place. "Get back to the house!" "My dog," Joseph protested. "Shoot the fucking thing, Sheriff, it's rabid!" Duane pulled the door of the truck closed again. The locks clicked from within. "Graham's dead!" The leather strap snapped loose with a click. Last thing he said was, "It wants the dog." He pulled the pistol, leveling it at Hera. Joseph took a startled step forward. "Whoa, whoa, whoa! You can't just shoot my dog, man!" Coughlin took a step towards Hera, his gun still raised. "I don't know what's going on here anymore." Panic clawed at the edge of the sheriff's voice. "All I know is that a dying boy very clearly told me something wanted your dog. So, yes, I'm sure as shit about to shoot your dog." He squinted. His finger tightened on the trigger of the pistol. Hera collapsed to the ground. Coughlin lowered his pistol, stunned. "Hera!" Joseph jogged around the truck. His chest hurt something awful. Coughlin wiped sweat out of his eyes. "I don't think I did anything in time." Joseph examined his dog. The 5-year-old German Shepherd was dead. Aside from a small amount of blood seeping from her nose and ears, she looked completely unharmed. The sound of car doors unlocking caused him to jerk his head up. Shit. He had forgotten about Duane. "Dead?" The car door creaked open. Duane unwound his 6-foot frame and stepped outside. "Graham is fucking dead?" His brown eyes bulged with terror. "No way! I'm not fucking dying here!" Duane sprinted up the road away from the Murick house. "Stop!" The voice of Graham Laurel dragged itself from the form of the prone dog. "Holy shit." Coughlin raised his pistol. Joseph fell, madly scooting away from Hera's corpse. "Duane, stop!" Graham shouted through Hera's still mouth. Duane stopped on the road ahead and turned around. "Get away from the dog, Joseph." Coughlin thumbed the safety of his pistol off. Joseph scrambled to the other side of the truck, his heart racing. "Graham?" Duane took a few uneasy steps back towards the truck. "Don't listen, Duane!" Coughlin shouted from the truck. Duane ignored the sheriff and took a few more steps back toward the group. Hera's jaws stretched into a horrific grin. "Oh, shit. Duane, get back!" Coughlin fired 3 rounds into the dog. Blood and fur arched through the air. Up the road, Duane froze mid-step, his jaw sagging open lazily. "Get back to your house, Joseph." Coughlin still had his gun drawn, and he walked toward the driver's seat of the van. "Go inside. I'm calling in more units. Something is fucked here." Joseph obeyed the good sheriff, who died mid-step, a heartbeat, after completing that same sentence. Something watched Sheriff Coughlin move toward the front of his truck. The enveloping, tenebrous intelligence that Graham and Duane Laurel encountered had grown strong. Clawing up from animals, it was ready for its intended prey. The air shifted around Duane. A breeze ruffled Coughlin's hair. He froze mid-stride. "Finally, you make sense." Everything that made Coughlin more than just a biological organism was destroyed instantly. With a great, invisible devouring, it consumed the sheriff. It reveled in its conquest, savoring. The man that was Coughlin stared blankly into space, his jaw hanging open. Joseph raised his hands over his head, carefully breathing in 3-second intervals, something he had been taught to slow down the old ticker. 1, 2, 3. He let his breath escape. 1, 2, 3. He was almost to the house. He would just throw all the locks closed on the doors and sit down. He wheezed up the small incline leading to the back door, pausing to take a few more breaths at the door. 1, 2. His gaze pivoted back to the truck. The sheriff was nowhere to be seen. The police truck remained unperturbed. Its driver's side door never opened. Backup never called for. His breathing rhythm fell to pieces. He sucked air in with sharp, jagged hitches. He felt cold. A tingle began to spread from the center of his chest, radiating outwards. Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. He forced his jagged breathing to a halt, pulling in another deep gasp of air. He had to get inside. He turned, extending his right arm and throwing the screen door open. It clattered off the side of the house, swinging shut with a slow whine. Joseph scrambled to the back door, locking it behind him and flipping all of the porch lights on. He heard Beth stand up in the living room, approaching with slow, uneven steps. She must have been asleep. "All finished?" Beth rubbed at her eyes, ending the sentence with an unceremonious yawn while pulling off her old bulky headphones. She didn't hear. "Beth," Joseph said. 1, 2, 3. "Lock the front door. Fuck it, lock all the windows too." "Joseph, you're scaring me." She was fully awake now. "What happened?" "Just, please go lock up." He approached his wife, squeezing her shoulders gently. "I'll tell you after I call the station." "Wait, we need to let Hera in." Beth moved to push past her husband. He didn't move. "Elizabeth, don't," Joseph said. His wife looked up at him. "If something's out there, then we need her." Her voice raised to her no longer messing around tone. "Hera is dead, Beth," Joseph said. Beth whimpered. Her shoulders slumped. "Just, please, go lock up. I'll explain after I call the station." She nodded, tear-brimmed eyes blinking rapidly. Beth looked ready to burst with questions, but Joseph's stern gaze squelched any further interrogation. She set about sliding old locks into place and drawing the curtains shut across the various windows. Joseph shakily approached the old wall-mounted plastic phone, willing himself to calm down. He snagged the receiver and punched in 911. Nothing. He hung the phone up, then lifted it to his ear again. Nothing. No fucking dial tone. He slammed the phone into its cradle. Joseph pressed the heels of his palms into his eyes and rubbed. Brilliant colors ran across his vision. He felt clammy, sick. Beth was finished with her errand, entering the living room at a rapid pace. "Joseph," Beth whispered. She walked slowly, sticking to the most interior wall of the house as if monstrous hands would burst through any window or door and yank her through. "What's happening?" Joseph approached the back door. He slid the curtain obscuring his view of the police truck aside, except there was no police truck now. He closed his eyes slowly. That's impossible. He breathed and opened his eyes. No truck. Not so much as tire depressions in the long grass of his backyard. Nothing at all. "Joseph?" Beth squeaked. "Remember the argument we got into about whether or not we should own a gun?" Joseph turned back to his wife. "Yeah? Why?" "Go get the gun. You're about to be glad I want that one," Joseph said. Beth puffed up to the second story of their house. They built the place back in the 70s, and Joseph wasn't what you called handy. Stairs creaked, and exposed nails hid around the most innocent of corners, ready to snag an elbow or rip a brand new shirt. She paused, stepping awkwardly over the second to highest step. It was loose. Joseph promised to fix it about 2 months ago. She paused when she made it to the second floor. It was getting dark quickly, and the shadow-filled hallway stretching around the corner filled her with a nameless sense of dread. She flicked on lights as she proceeded toward the master bedroom and the small closet that held the shotgun. She darted into Joseph's office, turning on the primary lamp as she went. The locks on these windows had a layer of paint over them, so she used a metal paperweight to pound them closed. Once done, she left the office. She turned left at the end of the hallway and pushed open the door to the master bedroom. It was always dark in here. She instinctively groped to the right, grasping the 3 switches that controlled the lights to their room. She flipped them all on. but the room remained shrouded in the gloomy darkness. She could see far enough inside to locate the closet. The hallway light still worked, but something much more than a bad feeling began to inch itself into her mind. She thought about turning and calling down to Joseph, but stopped. "Don't be a child." She took a cautious step into the master bedroom. See, not so bad. She made her way around their king-sized bed. She navigated this room hundreds of times in the dark. She reached the far wall, feeling for the door of the closet. Cold metal brushed against her hand. She seized the knob and paused. She didn't want to open it. In fact, she never wanted to avoid something so badly. She released the knob. She had to decide fast. The darkness was scaring her. Fucking fuck it. The sound of her curses gave her the boost to grasp the knob and twist, opening the closet. She cringed, but nothing bound out of the darkness to rip her limb from limb. She smiled to herself and entered. Let's find this gun and get back downstairs. She flipped the light switch in the closet out of habit. The bulb bloomed to life, and then shattered, sending a rain of glass and filament down onto the closet floor. Oh God! Beth covered her head with her hands. Tiny bits of debris bounced off her skin and nestled into her hair. Her heart hammered in her chest. She blindly groped for the shotgun. It rested at its normal spot, propped up against the back right corner. She seized it and sprinted out of the dark bedroom, aching for the comforting light of the hallway. Joseph could hear his wife scurrying back toward the stairs from below. He left his post by the back door and moved toward the stairway. Eventually, she arrived at the top of the stairwell, clutching the dusty old shotgun. Joseph took 2 long strides up the stairs and extended a hand. Beth tossed him the gun. Thanks, honey, Joseph said. What's happening? The power in our room didn't work. Everything else was all right, though. Beth shook her head. Think a fuse? No, not a fuse. Joseph turned and, taking the stairs 2 at a time, headed for the kitchen. Crossing to the pantry, he began rummaging for the unopened box of shotgun shells. Something is out there. I'm not sure what. Joseph pushed aside a few boxes of oatmeal. Gotta watch that cholesterol. He snapped the heavy box out of one of the darker corners of the pantry, plopped it on the table, and set about clumsily loading the firearm. Something? Like an animal? Oh God, did those poor boys get attacked by something? Beth's eyes widened with panic, already glassing over with tears. No, not an animal, Joseph said. A shell slipped out of his grip and skittered across the floor. He paid it no mind. Well, it could be, I suppose. I haven't seen it, so I don't really know what to tell you. The final shell clicked into place. He felt a surge of courage. All I know is that we're staying inside until it's light. Nothing gets opened until morning. Why don't we just call someone? Beth made for the phone, but was stopped by the way Joseph looked at her. No phone? Joseph shook his head. He watched her entire frame begin to tremble ever so slightly. He let the shotgun lean against a nearby cabinet and massaged the left side of his chest in slow circles with his right hand. Beth was on the move before he could stop her. She returned with a small orange plastic bottle containing his medication. Joseph smiled gratefully, accepting the small bottle, letting his fingers linger over hers for a few seconds. Joseph trundled to the refrigerator, pulling it open with a soothing swoosh. The cold air against his face felt nice. He grabbed a bottle of water, snapped it open, and popped a few of the minuscule pills into his mouth. Some of the anxiety burning low in the back of his head began to fade. The medicine always helped. The Murick family sat down at their kitchen table, a loaded shotgun on display instead of a home-cooked meal, and waited. Beth sprawled across the table, her hair covered her face, puffing out in a slow rhythm to match her breathing. Joseph yawned. His eyes felt itchy. He scrunched his face and rotated his neck, issuing a loud series of cracks. Beth mumbled something across the table but remained asleep. The oven's display glowed in the background. Only 3 a.m. It was still pitch black outside and completely silent. Nothing disturbed them since the disappearance of the sheriff, and that set him on edge. Joseph stood up as quietly as he could in a creaky old house and took the shotgun from the table. He crept, quiet footstep by footstep, until he was face to face with the small, eye-level window above the back door. His left hand shook as he began to draw back the blinds, not sure what he was even looking for, but nothing greeted him. The porch lights hummed pleasantly, bathing their porch in a yellowish light. All evidence of the truck and its crew vanished, something that still troubled him deeply. Maybe it was over. Maybe whatever came to the area had lost interest in an old man and his wife. Just maybe. "No, Joseph, I'm still here." Joseph stifled a scream. The voice came from just outside of the back door. It sounded wrong. He could understand what was being said, but the words sounded robotic, like someone who just learned French struggling with their first restaurant order. "Not without kindness, Joseph." Hair stood on the back of his neck. His hands quaked. Beth remained asleep at this table. Something told him this conversation was private. "You will have your night. What is left of it. I am no," it paused. "Murderer, yes, murderer. I have learned. I have felt what your microscopic kind call an excuse for feelings, for emotions." The strange accent began to fade. The voice became clearer, louder. It became human. "I have felt your needless fear, your struggle," the voice of Sheriff Coughlin said through the thin wooden door. "But do not be afraid." The voice lowered, becoming quiet. "Soon you'll join us," Graham Laurel cried out joyfully. Joseph staggered away from the door, the shotgun bouncing wildly as he attempted to steady his aim at the door. The doorway was quiet now. The sound of feet leaving the area of the back door was absent. Complete silence. Once more. "Joseph?" Beth picked her head up, pushing her hair out of her face. Joseph lowered the shotgun and put on his best fake smile. His wife rubbed her eyes. "What time is it?" "Only about 3-ish. He glanced at the back door. "Still a ways to go yet, I'm afraid." He walked back to the kitchen table, extending a hand to his wife. "Things have been quiet. Why don't we go get more comfortable?" He smiled. She smiled back. "Oh, if you really think it's safe." Beth stood up and accompanied her husband upstairs. They left the hall lights on. Beth became nervous when they rounded the corner to a completely lit master bedroom. She'd left the switches on during her excursion for the gun. Maybe it was just the old house after all. Joseph shrugged. He crossed to his side of the bed and sat down. More than anything, he longed to sleep. "What about that thing?" Beth sat down next to him, resting her head on his shoulder. "That animal or whatever it was." "I think it got bored. How about we just relax for a while?" Joseph threw his right arm over Beth's shoulder, pulling her in close. They sat this way for a while, both tired, but happy to be together. Only one knowing that this night would most likely be their last. Sleep wasn't much of an option, so they sat together, talking through the long hours of the night while the rest of the township around them slept. They talked about their upcoming trip across country to bask in the Pacific sun. They talked about their children, long ago grown and moved off to start their own lives. All three of them more than proving their ability to handle the wild world outside of their parents' door. Joseph struggled to keep composure. As time dragged on, he became more and more terrified. He had to remain calm for Beth. Soon, conversation began to wane and Beth's eyelids grew heavy. She would fall asleep for a few short seconds, then wake back up with a start. Joseph smiled and pulled back the sheets on the bed. Wordlessly, Beth slid into them, fluffing her pillows, the very picture of comfort. In no time at all, she fell blissfully asleep. Joseph lay next to her, his right hand still entwined with hers. He craned his neck around the sleeping form of his wife. The bright blue display of the clock caused his heart to sink. 5 a.m. How much longer would they have? He slid out of the bed. 35 years of marriage armed him with the ability to disengage from any of Beth's encompassing embraces undetected. Before leaving, he leaned over his wife and planted a kiss on her forehead. She stirred slightly as if unconsciously acknowledging it. Joseph took a deep breath and walked across the room to the door. He glanced behind him and smiled. Nothing will touch her. Not as long as I'm here. He hefted the weight of the shotgun onto his shoulder and walked toward his study. He pushed the door open and grinned. He kicked off his shoes, letting his sore feet enjoy the plush carpet. The air was musky with the scent of years of cigar smoke. Joseph took up the habit a while back, much to Beth's displeasure. He avoided his desk. The plush leather armchair seemed much more enticing. He recalled hours of smoky viewings of SportsCenter, drinks shared with good friends, many of whom had moved far away enough to drift into obscurity. He flipped open the lid of the lacquered brown box resting on the small side table. He produced a cigar and a lighter from within. There would be no opening of windows this time, no hiding, just pure enjoyment. He bit into the cigar and clicked open the silver lighter. His thumb flicked the ignition once, but no flame. He huffed. The lighter clicked again as he attempted another light. Nothing. Motherfucker, Joseph growled through his mostly closed mouth. He flicked the lighter again and the small TV in his office lit up. Static roared through the room. White light blinded him momentarily. The cigar fell from his mouth. Where's the damn remote? He scrambled out of his chair, slapping at the buttons lining the side of the TV. Eventually, the noise ceased. His ears rung. Yeah, tough guy? Joseph looked around the room, waiting for his assailant. Nothing followed but silence. He crossed the room, returning to his chair. He snatched the cigar and lighter from their spots on the floor. He clicked the lighter open. This time, a bright red flame danced merrily after the first strike. He moved the lighter closer, puffing the cigar to life. Thick, oily fumes soon filled the room. He closed his eyes and allowed himself a moment of rest. Joseph! Joseph's eyes shot open and he grabbed the shotgun. Nothing in the room moved. He was alone. Cold fear began to press its way up his spine. He stood up from the chair, breathing as calmly as he could. He pushed open the door with the barrel of his gun and peeked out. He walked the hallway and peered around the corner to see Beth dozing in the room down the hall. Aside from that, nothing out of the ordinary. He returned to his office, still examining the hallway. Joseph! The voice spoke from directly behind him. He cried out and jumped back into the hall, spinning and firing the shotgun. The blast shook him from head to toe. The shot tore the computer on his desk apart. The only casualty in the room was his 5-year-old PC. Son of a bitch! He clutched the left side of his chest. He glanced again at the master bedroom. The door was shut. No! 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 He ran to the door, frantically turning the knob in both hands. Locked. He pounded his fists on the door. Beth! Wake up! No noise issued from inside of the room. He spun to face the empty hallway. Don't you touch her! He yelled into the morning air. The only reply was the faint sound of glass breaking from downstairs. Gooseflesh sprang up across both his arms. He pulled the gun up, ejecting the spent shell from the chamber. The stairs were empty, as far as he could tell. More glass breaking from downstairs, followed by what he could only describe as a strange grunt. Joseph pressed his back against the far wall of the stairs and proceeded toward the back door, gun held at shoulder height. He reached the bottom of the stairs and looked through the kitchen. The screen door lay on the ground, ripped from the hinges. The back door hung open. The white eyelet drapes dangling from the windows were streaked with the blood. Glass littered the floor. Something, or someone else was inside the house. But whatever he was dealing with did not seem to be troubled by barriers, physical or otherwise. Sheriff Coughlin barreled into Joseph from behind, sending the older man sprawling across the floor. He was half convinced that he would blow his own head off when he landed on the shotgun. The two men tumbled to the ground. The shotgun came loose from Joseph's grip and clattered across the floor, coming to rest near the wall by the back door. "Interesting," Sheriff Coughlin spoke in the same strange voice he heard throughout the evening. "Such specimens you are." The sheriff shoved Joseph off of him and stood. Joseph crawled toward the shotgun only to feel the hands of the stout man close around his right foot. His hand squeaked across the wooden floor as Coughlin dragged him into the kitchen. The sheriff moved strangely, like a man who spent far too much time on a boat than dry land. Joseph kicked out with his left leg, striking Coughlin just behind his right knee. He staggered and fell, losing his grip on Joseph's wriggling foot. Clumsy, however. Coughlin quickly regained his balance. Joseph shrieked and backed toward the door. Small fragments of glass shredded his palms. Bloody handprints marked his traversal across the floor. Sheriff Coughlin towered menacingly over him. His eyes rolled up to their whites and opened wide. Far too wide. Bulging blood vessels ran over the milky white surface of those eyes. His mouth hung open in a mask of terror. His open jaw twisted in a horrible, muted scream that allowed the strange voice to pour out. "This one did not like you." Coughlin took a wobbly step toward Joseph. "Crazy old bastard." Coughlin's own voice escaped from his paralyzed mouth. Another step. This one steadier. Joseph shook himself free of his terror. The shotgun. Where is... Coughlin darted forward and pulled Joseph up from the floor by the collar of his shirt. Joseph cried out and struck Coughlin a heavy blow to the temple with his right hand. Coughlin's grip remained strong. "So much hate in all of you. This is what you all want, below all of your niceties and manners." Coughlin released his right hand and dealt Joseph a thundering blow to the side of his head. Color exploded behind Joseph's eyes. He sagged momentarily, unable to reorient himself. "I've learned everything about you that I could possibly ever need to make my choice." He struck Joseph again, this time a backhand across the other side of his face. Joseph grunted. Blood seeped from between his lips. His nose hurt like hell. Joseph rocked his hand back and pitched forward, slamming his forehead into those terrifying eyes. A satisfying crunch answered. The Coughlin thing released its grip and stumbled backwards. Joseph dropped to the ground and snatched the gun, leveling it at Coughlin. "What the fuck are you?" Joseph felt like he was going to faint, but held his ground. "I am the first of many. The Envoy." Coughlin gargled what may have been a laugh. "Are you?" Joseph had so many questions, but Coughlin interrupted his line of thought. "I'm with your wife now." The voice was cold. Joseph fired. Coughlin crumpled backwards, his torso shredded by the close proximity of the blast. His corpse crashed into the kitchen table, knocking aside chairs and smashing loose plates. "All the same, all so violent," it said through Coughlin's still mouth. Joseph paid the being no heed and stormed up the stairs. His chest began to throb alarmingly before his confrontation with the good sheriff. Now, it was full-blown spasm of agony arching through his left arm. So be it. If he was going to die, at least his own body would do the job. The door to the master bedroom was now wide open. The room was silent. The large window, which was no longer covered by curtains, showed the sun peeking over the horizon. Joseph entered the room. "Beth." "Oh, God." His left hand rose to cover his mouth. Beth was sitting bolt upright in bed. Her eyes stared out the window. Tears streamed down her cheeks. A strange smell permeated the air. Joseph knew he should be able to identify it, but was unable until he pulled the sheets back. Urine stained Beth's clothes and the bed underneath her. "Shit. Oh, shit, Beth." Joseph crawled onto the bed. He let the shotgun drop from his grip. What did it matter? He gripped his wife by her arms. "Beth?" he asked, his voice quiet with worry. She turned her head slightly, drifting from the window to her husband. Her green eyes met with his and locked there. "Joseph." A horrifyingly wide smile ripped across her face. She looked more like the Cheshire Cat than his wife. Her hand shot up, grabbing the side of his head. They felt like vices. Fingernails dug into the flesh of his scalp, drawing blood. "Beth, you're hurting me!" Joseph attempted to struggle, but she was so much stronger. "Joseph, just look. It can all be over." She began to wrench her husband's head toward the window. He struggled briefly, fighting her until the pain in his chest was too much to bear. He let go. His head turned towards the window. "He just wants to learn," Beth whispered into his ear. Outside, something shifted in the brightening dawn.
Saturday. This sounds absolutely idiotic. I know you've all heard this kind of thing before. Someone thinks her house is haunted, everyone else assures her that she's just paranoid, and all kinds of terror and gore follows. It's the stuff of every campy B-list horror movie. But I swear on my life, I'm not crazy. No one believes me. But then I found this forum, and I think maybe someone can help me. Let me explain. I moved to Boston from Minneapolis about a month ago to start work as a postdoctoral fellow in a research lab at Harvard Medical School. See? I'm a smart person. I'm not crazy. I ended up living with a friend of a friend in her tiny apartment that's definitely not designed for 2 people. It's not old and decrepit like you see in the movies. It was probably built in the 1970s, and there's nothing scary about the building itself besides lead paint on the walls. However, I became uneasy the very first time I looked in the bathroom mirror. I was brushing my teeth when I thought I saw a flicker of movement behind me. I turned around thinking it must be my new roommate. She hadn't been there the entire afternoon while I was moving my boxes in, so I hadn't met her yet. I poked my head out the door to look for her, but she was nowhere to be seen. I shrugged and continued brushing my teeth, not thinking much of the moment, but feeling slightly on edge. The next few days were crazy, so I wasn't exactly sitting around staring at the bathroom mirror all day. I was getting accustomed to my lab, filling out mountains of paperwork, losing my ID card, and getting locked out of the mouse facility. You know, normal work stuff. It wasn't until a week later, when I decided to do some deep cleaning of the apartment, that I took a good look at the mirror again. And the mirror took a good look back at me. There I was, perched halfway on the sink and scrubbing the mirror with glass cleaner, when I caught a flash of movement and saw a face in the glass, like someone was standing right behind me. I inhaled sharply and fell off the counter, dropping the cleaning supplies with a huge clatter that sent my roommate running to see what happened. After explaining that I had just lost my balance and everything was fine, somehow I didn't think that babbling about mysterious phantoms in the mirrors was good roommate bonding material. I cautiously peered back into the mirror. There was nothing but my flushed and worried face. I mentally berated myself for being so stupid. I was a logical, smart scientist, not someone who fell for scary stories and believed in ghosts. I was just freaking myself out. Stress from work or something. Maybe I was sick. I started to sound eerily similar to Scrooge denying the reality of the ghost of Jacob Marley. Fast forward to later that night, when I woke up desperately needing to use the bathroom. Of course, after carrying out that task, I needed to wash my hands, which was located... You see where this is going. I tried to focus on nothing but my hands, but I couldn't help taking a peek at the mirror. And then I screamed loud enough to wake up the whole building. In the dim light, I could see a girl's face, reflected in the same spot I had seen it before, near the upper right-hand corner. Her pale skin was dull and pasty, and her hair was stringy and unkempt. She looked to be in her late teens, maybe 16 or 17. Her face was utterly plain and unmemorable, besides her expression of abject terror. A hand touched my shoulder, and I swear my heart practically exploded in fear and shock. It turned out to be my roommate again, this time sleepier and more annoyed. I sank down to the floor and breathed heavily, trying to calm my heart rate. What the hell is going on? Cassie asked wearily. Fear outweighed pride, and I decided that enough was enough. I had to tell her. And she would be able to see it too. The face was right there in the mirror, plain as day. It's that face in the mirror. The girl who looks at you and... My voice came out embarrassingly shaky and weak, and I trailed off, realizing how stupid I sounded. Cassie gaped at me. So you screamed and woke everyone within a mile radius because you saw a face in the mirror. Did you forget what mirrors are for? Let me explain for you. The mirror reflects your own face. No, it's not me, I protested squeakily. It's someone else. Look. I stood up and grabbed her shoulders, turning her to face the mirror. In the right-hand corner, see? See her face? Oh my God, her eyes are moving. She's watching us. Slowly, Cassie put her hand on mine, which was flailing around in a panic. Liz, she said carefully, go to sleep. You had a bad dream and you're freaking out. There's nothing there. I couldn't even form words to reply. I could see the girl in the mirror, plain as day, right next to my face. Her eyes were trained on me, but she blinked slowly, and her nostrils flared slightly as she breathed in and out. How could I be seeing things or making it up? I must have been losing my mind. I slunk back to bed and sobbed under my covers until I fell asleep. For 3 days, I brushed my teeth and washed my hands in the kitchen sink, and I closed my eyes every time I passed the mirror. I avoided all conversation with Cassie and went so far as to stay and work overnight at the lab one night. But my curiosity was running like crazy the entire time, and I finally broke down. Saturday afternoon, not the middle of the night, I had learned my lesson about that. I girded my loins and took a trip to the mirror. She was there again, waiting for me. Her bottomless black eyes bored into mine, and I thought I could hear her humming right at the edge of audibility. Without realizing, I leaned closer and closer until my nose bumped into the glass and brought me back to my senses. I backed up rapidly, pressing myself against the wall behind me, but I couldn't break eye contact. Her desperate, pleading face drew me in like a magnet, and against my will, I found myself moving closer again until the front door banged open and Cassie entered with her boyfriend. I started washing my hands, pretending I hadn't just been staring at a ghost. Was she a ghost? In the mirror. Cassie had been acting very cautiously around me, as though I might start foaming at the mouth and shouting about ghosts at the drop of a hat. So I wanted to project an image of total sanity. I couldn't help taking one more look as I dried my hands, however. The girl's mouth was open, and the humming was louder, a tune that tickled at the back of my mind like a far-off memory I couldn't reach. I ran back to my room and barricaded the door. Then I started doing some research, which is, after all, what I do best. So tomorrow, I'm going to try something. I'm going to talk to her. During the daytime, when hopefully I won't get as scared or jump to conclusions. I want to know if she's conscious. I'll report back then. Sunday. Okay, things are escalating fast. It took forever for Cassie to leave the apartment today, but I finally had the place to myself. After chickening out several times, I finally crept down to the bathroom and looked in the mirror, which was empty of anything but my face. I slumped down the wall, my head spinning, wondering if this was how insanity started. Pretty soon, I wouldn't be able to function because I'd be staring into the bathroom mirror all day, ranting and raving about humming ghosts. Speaking of humming, I froze. I could hear her again. Slowly, I pushed myself up off the floor and looked in the mirror. She was back. I was flooded with equal parts relief. I was right, she was really there. And terror. There was a phantom in my mirror. Her mouth was open wider today, and the humming was louder. This was my chance to talk to her. And since her vocal cords were apparently working, maybe she'd talk back. I cleared my throat ineffectively and choked out a single, "Hello?" The humming stopped immediately. Her face grew larger, as though she was stepping closer to the other side of the mirror. Her mouth opened slowly, slowly, slowly. And finally, eyes drilling into mine, she spoke. "Let me out, let me out, let me out." She repeated the phrase over and over as I stared open-mouthed. Her voice was plaintive, but also robotic, as though she had said this for years with no one listening. Finally, it occurred to me to keep talking and see if I could get her to say something else. "Who are you?" Her mouth closed with a sharp clack of teeth, and then opened again slowly to form the word, "You." Fear coursed through my body like a series of electric shocks. She didn't repeat the word again, but stared harder at me. I couldn't look away. Are you dead?" I whimpered, all sense of bravado lost. She smirked at me. "Are you dead?" Great. Now I was talking to a mirror that mirrored my words. But then she continued, "You will be soon." I opened my mouth and realized I couldn't speak. I would be dead soon? Oh my God, this was insane. This couldn't be happening. I refused to allow myself to be scared by a figment of my imagination, telling me that I would die soon. An angry reply bubbled up in my throat, but before I could spit it out, her face faded from the surface of the mirror, and all I could see was my face once more. I don't know what to do now. Sunday night. I can hear her from my room. She hums or repeats, "Are you dead?" ad nauseum, or she takes a relaxing break by hissing my name over and over. Liz, Liz, Elizabeth. I have never hated my name so much. I can't believe Cassie supposedly can't hear this. I'm going to bed. This is insane. I'll tell you if anything happens tomorrow. Monday night. It's almost midnight, and I got home 2 hours ago. I stayed late at the lab. I'd like to say it's because of my superior work ethic and drive to succeed. But honestly, I was just afraid to go home. But then I started freaking out whenever I saw mirrors in the bathrooms at work. I guess if I'm going to be terrified by mirrors, I'd rather be terrified in a place where I can run and hide beneath my covers in under 60 seconds if the need arises. For an hour, I sat in my room listening to her hum my name over and over. I could feel her presence pulling me toward the bathroom, but I tried to resist. Finally, I couldn't help it. I scampered down the hall like a scared bunny and went to see her. I don't know what happened from then until about 5 minutes ago, and I'm terrified by that. I don't remember any time passing, but suddenly it was much later, and I was sitting cross-legged on top of the sink, nose to nose with her face. It suddenly occurred to me that I couldn't see my own reflection in the mirror, just hers. That shock was enough to propel me out of the room. For now. I've noticed that as soon as I leave the bathroom, I feel physical relief, like something heavy is pressing down on me the entire time I'm there and it lifts. But somehow, that magnetic pull keeps dragging me back. Tuesday. I couldn't go to work today. She wouldn't let me. I sat with her all day, and she hummed my name. Wednesday. She wants me to let her out. I don't know how. When I asked, all she said was, "You will be soon." Thursday. I think I need help. Can anyone tell me how I could get her out? Should I break the mirror? Is there some kind of spell? Thursday, 2 hours later. She keeps saying, "Let me out. Are you dead?" And "You will be soon," over and over. And it finally just hit me. Maybe, there always has to be someone in the mirror. Maybe I need to die to let her out. I'm gonna go sit with her. She's so lonely. Friday. Am I dead? Saturday. Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, this is unreal. This is Cassie. I saw this thread open on Liz's computer after... Well, she never shut it down, and I saw it, and oh my god. I don't know where to start. I don't know what's going on. I probably shouldn't even be posting here. The police will want her computer for evidence, but I'm so scared. Liz is dead. I came home Friday night thinking everything was normal, and walked into a nightmare. The bathroom mirror was shattered, and Liz stood in front of it, her nose centimeters from the broken glass surface, holding a massive shard loosely in her fingers. My mind was completely empty, and I couldn't breathe. My ears rang, but underneath it all, I could hear her humming her own name. Liz. Liz. She raised the shard of glass to her throat, and before I could know what was going on or could come to my senses enough to stop her, she sliced. There's a lot of blood in the human body, incidentally. Obviously, I'm not at home right now. It's a crime scene. I'm staying at my boyfriend's house. I haven't used the bathroom in 8 hours because I'm afraid to look in the mirror. But I don't know how much longer I can hold out. I don't know if anyone else is actually online right now, but if I don't reply for 10 minutes... Never mind. You can't even do anything. Wish me luck. Sunday. There are 2 girls in my mirror, and they sing my name through the walls. Cassie. Cassie. They ask me to let them out. I'm going to go sit with them. They must be so lonely. Am I dead yet?
She walked up to me, bright-eyed and smiling, as I stood in the crowd waiting for the train. Her mouth was moving, but what she said was a mystery. The misfits blasted through my headphones, a ritual of mine intended to mask the noise of the busy commuter trains. "Excuse me?" I pulled the headphones from my ears and raised an eyebrow at her. "He sees you." The girl's eyes locked with mine, wide open and dilated to the point that her pupil seemed to swallow her iris. What? I gave her my best, "What are you on?" look. "He sees you. He wants you," she said matter-of-factly. The smile never wavered from her face. The small blonde girl was starting to creep me out big time. My first assumption was that she was drugged out of her mind, but she didn't look like the typical druggie. The girl wore a cleanly pressed red suit, the skirt hemmed just above the knee. She was draped with diamond jewelry and wore a haircut that probably cost more than my education. Who sees me?" I pressed. Maybe it was the way she was dressed, or maybe it was the way she carried herself, but this level of crazy didn't seem to fit the person. I decided to indulge her another minute before I put my headphones back in and returned to my usual "don't engage the crazies" mode. "He sees you." She retained the same strange expression, a smile plastered onto an otherwise emotionless face. I stared at her a few more seconds, waiting for her to elaborate before finally giving up the game. "Okay, lady, time to get back on the meds. Or off the drugs. Whichever." I shoved my headphones back into my ears and turned away from her dismissively. I was just in time to hear Danzig launch into the chorus of skulls, and I fell back down into my own little world. It was hardly my first time dealing with some drugged-out nutcase during my nightly commute. Ignoring them was usually the best possible response. At some point, I realized that the girl was still standing exactly where she'd been before. I could see her staring intently at me from the corner of my eye. After another moment, she turned away from me and headed back through the crowd in the direction she'd come from. I shook my head in disbelief at just how whacked out that seemingly put-together lady really was, and turned my music up to deafening levels. A few minutes later, I boarded the train. As per my usual routine, I walked to the last car and went to sit on the top level. As I settled into my seat, I saw the blonde girl walk through the doors into my car. Her two wide eyes fixed on me immediately, and a Looney Tunes smile corrupted her pretty face. I quickly shifted my eyes to look out the window, pretending not to register her presence. But I felt, rather than saw, her climb the stairs. The top level of the train car was nothing but a row of single seats on either side with a railing and a luggage shelf shared by both sides hanging from the ceiling. She went to the opposite side of the car and sat a couple of seats back from where I was. I didn't look, but I swear I could feel her eyes on me the entire time. There were 10 stops between the main station we were pulling out from and my stop in Dentonderry. With each passing of a platform, I would glance behind me very briefly and casually, hoping to see an empty seat where she'd once been. But at each station, I was disappointed. The girl would be there, leaning out of her seat, eyes wide and staring, mouth smiling. She was making me nervous, and I found myself glancing back at her more and more often, and with less subtlety. Her expression never changed and her eyes never faltered from mine. I became increasingly concerned and unsettled that in a train car this crowded, nobody seemed to notice this psychopath staring me down, or at least no one acknowledged it. The other commuters' eyes were fixed downward, wrapped up in their own little worlds, ignoring my situation entirely. I counted down the stations, growing increasingly panicked the closer I got to my destination. When the train finally slowed down at my station, I bolted from my seat and took the descending steps 2 at a time. The instinct to get away from the stranger was so overwhelming. I'd never felt so uncomfortable in my life. The way she looked at me, it was like she wanted to eat me. I was the first one out the door and into the cool night air. I leapt down the steps of the train station and walked briskly out into the street. I chanced to look back, and when I didn't see the girl following, I slowed down a fraction and took a deep breath, laughing to myself. I pulled the headphones from my ears and took out the cigarettes from my pocket. Lighting a smoke, I watched the train pull away from the station, its whistle echoing and fading as it went on down the line. "Sayonara, psycho," I said aloud, and saluted the quickly departing train. It was a 10-minute walk back to my house, and I found myself walking much more quickly than usual that night. I could still feel her eyes on me, and I couldn't get her out-of-place smile and odd mannerisms out of my head. I smoked my cigarette and did my best to forget the whole encounter, ultimately failing, and before I knew it, I was standing at my front porch. The outside light had been broken for a while, and the house stood a dozen yards or so from the street, leaving the area in complete darkness. I shuddered involuntarily. "She's gone," I told myself. "It was just some crazy addict, that's all. Someone else's problem. Just because a meth head can dress herself doesn't mean she's not a couple beers shy of a six-pack." I took one last drag from my cigarette and then flicked it to the pavement, then walked up the stairs to my porch and found myself enveloped in an even deeper darkness. I fumbled in my pocket for my house keys, eventually found them, and then struggled to find the right one. I felt rushed, as if all the evil in the world was suddenly bearing down on me. I nearly broke into an insane sort of laughter, but I found the right key just before the madness overtook me. I pulled open the screen, ready to vault inside and flip on every light in the house. Then I felt a tap on my shoulder and heard the familiar voice of the stranger. "He sees you." Before I could react, she was on me. She wrestled me to the ground with what felt like the strength of a person 3 times her size. I felt all the air leave my lungs as my back connected with the unforgiving surface of my concrete porch. My hands grabbed wildly at her, trying to find purchase as she straddled me, a considerable weight set upon my body. My eyes, which were quickly adjusting to the darkness, took in the familiar 2 wide eyes and 2 animated smile. "He sees you," she repeated. "He wants you." A calm voice, a matter-of-fact voice. The more I tried to push her away, the further she leaned over me. For a girl her size, she was sporting a superhuman strength. Since she'd first attacked, her eyes had somehow grown even wider and whiter, and I found myself staring into the embodiment of pure madness. Her mouth had changed shape for the first time since I had seen her. It opened wide, and her jaw appeared to unhinge like some kind of snake. I screamed for someone, anyone, to help me as I continued to claw at her. And then something came writhing out of the darkness of her wide open mouth. In pure shock, I shot my hand up under her chin and tried to push her mouth closed. I felt something like tendrils wrap around my wrist, and little traces of slime drip down my arm.
I see you.
This voice was different from the stranger's. It was guttural and deep. It was the sound of something ancient and dead, and it came not from the woman's mouth, but from inside my own head. This was the end, I thought. In a last, pathetic attempt to save my own life, I took one hand off of her face and searched the bare ground next to me, trying desperately to find my keys. Her gaping maw drew ever closer to me, wider still, threatening to swallow me whole. Just as her upper lip touched my hairline, my fingers happened upon cool, sharp metal. I snatched the keys up and shoved the largest one between my middle and ring finger. With all the strength I had left, I punched the key into the side of her head, and then I did it again. At first, she seemed unfazed, even as I felt drops of her blood drip onto my arms and face from the repeated stab wounds I'd created in her cheek and temple. Then the key found a much softer target, pushed in deep, and caught her eye. The scream that echoed forth was something shrill and primal. No human could make that sound. Nothing living could make it. She released me and scrambled to her feet, hissing as she cupped her damaged eye. Then, before I could even get to my feet, she vaulted off my porch, clearing the steps in a single jump, and disappeared into the row of elms across the street. I sat up on one elbow, catching my breath and staring at the tree line for God knows how long. I could feel something oozing down my hand and covering my knuckles. The realization that it was fluid from her eye snapped me back to reality, and I got to my feet and into my house as fast as I could. I slammed the door behind me. That night and every night since, I've triple locked all of my doors and windows. I draw the shades and I keep the lights on at all times of day. The porch light is fixed, and I try to never get home after sundown. The nights when I do find sleep, it's usually thanks to whiskey. I keep a shotgun next to my bed. When I close my eyes, I see her stiff, unnatural smile and her black hole eyes. I don't know what she was or where she went, but I do know one thing. She's still coming for me. This morning, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was only 6 words, but they filled me with more terror than I ever thought I'd feel again. He sees you. He wants you.
Justice isn't blind. If she cannot see, then it's simply because she doesn't care enough to look. She turned away that dark night my sister was attacked, where even the moon and the stars must have hidden their faces in shame. From all accounts, it was an anonymous act of brutality, an impulsive flight, a brief struggle, the humiliation of rape, and then the lifetime of silent nightmares that must surely follow such depraved violence. I've heard it's a common story where the lonely roads meet beyond the protective halo of street lamps. For all the virtues we profess, there is a savagery dormant in us, waiting only for our fellow man to blink. It is easy to be noble while someone is watching, and the fear of judgment may yet steady our course. But in solitude, the moral compass will lose its bearing, replaced by whichever base instinct can scream louder than our pounding blood. It is some consolation that I found the one who valued his greed over human dignity. Through the course of these confessions, you will see that I am no better than the animal I hunted, so I will waste no time professing my merit now. I buy substances from a man who knew everything that happened in his neighborhood, and like anyone who seeks to profit from another's misfortune, he was willing to sell me the name I required. I found the rapist where he returned to the street my sister suffered upon, pacing and circling like a hungry animal, haunting the doorstep of his last meal. He didn't see me coming, and I made no sound nor spoke no word, save for the poetry of my bullet inscribed in his skull. I should have departed at once, but the satisfaction that his last throes of life promised lured me into complacent voyeurism. I stayed to tell him that my sister sent her love, hoping to purchase her closure with a death rattle rising in his throat. I wasn't expecting repentance, nor did I receive it. "It wasn't the first time, and it won't be the last," were his final words to reach living ears. I have no one to blame but myself and my zealous retribution for failing to notice that he didn't work alone. They were on top of me in moments, wrestling me to the ground and stomping my gun away from my shattered hand. Knives punctured my back and neck, leaving great sucking wounds which inhaled the night air, wounds breathing in place of my own lungs, which were swiftly filled with blood. There weren't any magnanimous thoughts or profound revelations as the lights went out. One moment there was simply light and pain and noise, and then nothing. And then nothing. And then I opened my eyes to find I was no longer of this world. I knew at once, despite the fact that I was sitting at a quite ordinary wooden desk, in a room no larger than a janitorial closet. On the desk was a piece of paper, and on the paper was a question, and in that question was written my fate for eternity. Welcome to hell. Would you like to 1. Remain human. You will be tortured by those who became demons. Or 2. Become a demon. You will torture those who remained human. P.S. If there aren't enough people to volunteer to remain human, they will be chosen randomly. I do not believe it is within my nature to torture anyone. Even my sister's abuser received death as fast as an executioner's axe. But no more could it be said it is within my nature to receive torture, as unnatural a human construct as can be imagined. But if I had to choose, as I'm sure many of you would have done so far removed from the judgment of both man and God, then I choose to accept my new home and don the mantle of hell I was offered. I steeled myself against the horrendous transformation I pictured, imagining razor talons growing from my bones to rip holes in the flesh, or an entropic decay to wreck my body until my skin ran down my face like candle wax. No physical transformation came over me, though, a phenomenon which I can only account to the devil's ironic sense of humor. I knew it from the first moment the floor dropped underneath to fling me down into the charnel realm, however. I was a demon now, and it was heaven to me. I expected the first time to be harder. The woman was presented to me in perfect physical health. I haven't noticed any discrepancies in age since I've arrived. Everyone looks to be in their mid-20s here. The room sealed, and I was given an hour to work on her. I find it distasteful to dwell on exactly what I did, but I remember rationalizing it cleanly with the knowledge that she was only here because she deserved it. Never mind that I was here too. Never mind that it could have been me randomly chosen. Never mind that she could have volunteered like this to spare another. She was in hell, and it was my job to make sure she knew it. It wasn't until I'd finished that I learned the second rule to this infernal game. Once the hour of punishment had been completed, the human is offered a choice. They can get revenge on me, or they can accept their pain and continue their journey. Those who refuse the chance to retaliate shall be incrementally elevated until at last their soul is cleansed and they are set to be reborn on earth. If, however, they choose to turn the torture on me instead, I will be nourished by the pain and descend further along the dark road I have chosen. For each blow inflicted upon me, my skin hardens, my muscles tighten, and my power will flourish. It didn't take long for me to realize how to properly play. The only way for me to progress was to inflict a punishment so foul and induce a hatred so deep in my victim that they choose revenge over the quality of their immortal soul. And progress I must, for untold centuries of this game repeated has refined some demons into legendary masters of their craft. Those demons have carved out kingdoms for themselves in this infernal domain, and through their countless successes have transformed themselves into towering behemoths of apocalyptic ability, shattering the landscape with their tread, and sending their lessers into groveling servitude. Since the moment I chose to become a demon, the gates of absolution have been closed to me forever. It may be my fate to dwell in this realm, but it was my choice to rule it. And so I went to work honing my skill. It wasn't enough to simply batter the humans into submission. If I was to force their hand against me, I had to get inside their mind, caressing and nurturing their spirit into one of mindless wrath. I learned to expose the subconscious dread lying dormant that even the bravest dare not shed light on. I mastered the art of wetting my brush in nightmares to repaint their memories, until all they once knew of life was corrupted by my influence. I promised false salvation, or deceived them into thinking they had escaped, or spoiled their loved ones, until they could not contain the anger I imbued within them. But I didn't stop there. I studied the ancient texts of demonic lore recounting the torment of dying stars from the beginning of time. I served under the foulest creatures I could find, watching their methods and improving upon their design. Experimentation, research, and endless practice refined my mastery over the subtle art until I could induce a pain so exquisite that angels would shed their wings for the chance to smite me down. And ever I grew stronger, building a devoted following of my own to gather more humans, ever inventing and facilitating the process of extracting unbearable anguish. My human form twisted into a sentient shadow to reflect the pervasive nature of my approach, each victory making it that much easier to dismantle my prey. And I loved every second of it. I relished in my progression and thought I could live here until the end of time, prospering and expanding my reign to all corners of the nether realm. Perhaps one day I would supplant the devil himself, designing my own games to watch the universe fold and decay under my guiding hand, and perhaps I would have continued this road forever had it not been for the fateful encounter where I finally met my match. A human was pushed into the room with me, and the door closed behind. I had an hour to play, but I wanted more. It was the man who shamed my sister, infuriatingly smug and dismissive of my ability to break his spirit. I thought I would enjoy this more than anything, but to my mounting dismay, he stubbornly refused my influence. He remained passive through the acid wash of his nerves. His mind did not falter as I summoned the image of his father's lamentations against him. Every trick, every torment, every mental ravaging left him smirking, until with exasperation, I resigned myself to simply goad him into action. You must feel cheated, forced to remain human at the mercy of every lowly criminal who cares to punish you. I wasn't forced, he replied. I made the choice. Then you're an idiot who deserves what he gets. And what I'll get is freedom. I told you this wasn't the first time, and that it won't be the last, he said. I've been to hell so many times that it bores me. So that was his secret. He had gotten out before. He knew how to play the game. But it didn't matter, because no one played it like I did. So you really won't retaliate, I asked, no matter what I do? He shook his head, the smirk unaltered. I'm going back to Earth, and when I do, I'm gonna remember this like I always do. I'm gonna wait until I've grown strong again, and just for this, I'm gonna find your sister, and I'm gonna do it again. I had almost forgotten about my sister, about the world above, filled with its myriad of joys and sorrows. I missed her in that moment. I missed being alive, and as much as I enjoyed the role I had carved for myself here, I wanted to be back again. The thought that this monster would patiently wait out his trials, cheating the system over and over to return to his life of sin, it made me sick. The tables had turned, and all the hatred I sought to pour into him was rushing into me instead. I wanted nothing more than to flay him down to the core of his being and set such a fire in what remained to burn for all time. But even if I could somehow force his hand against me, even if I broke him so badly that he never escaped, I would still be here forever. And I hated him, and I hated myself, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done to hold on to that hatred and turn it aside. And harder still, to let him walk away, to bide my time, sending the weakest demons in my possession so that he might easily resist their influence, watching and waiting and even helping my sister's attacker elevate through hell until the time of his salvation was at hand. It was hard, but it was worth it, because that is when I chose to strike. I had already learned to infiltrate the mind in my pursuit of torture, and through my mastery I had infiltrated the spirit as well. I hid within his soul when his judgment was passed, concealing my hatred within his hatred, tempering my fire with his calculating patience. And when that soul was whisked away, I traveled with it, sleeping so softly within his dreams that even he did not know he bore me as his silent passenger, until the day when he was born on earth, and I with him. The struggle was violent but brief. It is easy to wrestle an infant's mind from them, and when the child's eyes opened, it was I who looked out. He may resist me yet, but I bear with me all the subtle crafts I have honed in hell, carrying them to earth, where they can be put to better use. You see, hell is heaven for the demons, but all the worst of us have found our way back home.
Chilling tales for dark nights.